I never thought the people who raised me, the ones who taught me about loyalty and hard work, would be the same ones to stab me in the back. Yet here I am, years later, still replaying that moment in my head, the day my parents fired me from the very business I helped build. To give some context, my parents started a mid-sized supply company when I was still in high school. It wasn't glamorous, we weren't making cutting-edge tech or flashy products. We sold industrial materials, the kind of stuff no one thinks about but every business needs. What it lacked in glamour, it made up for in stability. And from the moment I turned 18, I was all in. While my friends were out partying in college, I was working 60-plus-hour weeks in our warehouse, learning the ropes, building client relationships, and slowly modernizing systems that had been outdated since the 90s. My parents praised me constantly, told me I was the future of the company. I believed them. The problem was my brother, Matt. Unlike me, Matt had zero interest in hard work. He drifted through life, failing out of community college, bouncing from one half-baked business idea to another. But my parents always gave him chance after chance. They kept him on payroll despite the fact that he barely showed up. When he did, he spent more time scrolling on his phone than actually doing anything useful. I swallowed my resentment for years because I thought, at least my parents see the difference. At least they'll reward dedication when it matters. I was wrong. One Tuesday morning, completely out of nowhere, my parents called me into the office. I figured it was another strategy meeting. Maybe we were discussing a new supplier or expanding into another region. But the way they avoided eye contact, the way my mom nervously shuffled papers on her desk, told me something was off. Then my dad dropped the bomb. Son, we've been reviewing the company finances. And unfortunately, we need to make some cuts. Your position is being eliminated. I thought I misheard him. I laughed, waiting for the punchline. But when I looked at their faces, there was no humor. Just guilt. You're firing me? I asked, my voice cracking. Mom jumped in quickly, like she was trying to soften the blow. Honey, it's not like that. You've done so much for this business. But with payroll the way it is, we can't afford to keep everyone. We had to make a tough choice. My mind was spinning. So, Matt? Silence. They didn't even bother denying it. Matt was staying. The guy who did nothing, who drained resources, who was practically a ghost in the company, he was safe. Meanwhile, the one who had bled for this business, was being shown the door. I remember standing there in disbelief. My heart felt like it had been ripped out. Years of loyalty, late nights, sacrificed relationships, all tossed aside like trash. I packed up my things in silence. Matt didn't even look up from his phone when I walked past his desk. My dad gave me a firm nod, as though we were concluding some sort of professional transaction, while my mom gave me a half-hearted hug that felt more like an obligation. That was the last day I ever stepped into that office as an employee. But it wasn't the last day I thought about revenge. The weeks after getting fired were some of the darkest in my life. It wasn't just about losing a job. It felt like losing my identity. I had poured almost 10 years of my life into that company, and suddenly, I had nothing to show for it. No degree, no backup plan, no safety net. Just the bitter taste of betrayal. First, I spiraled. I'd wake up at 6 a.m. out of sheer habit, only to remember I had nowhere to be. I'd sit in my apartment, scrolling job boards, my chest tightening with anger every time I saw listings for entry-level warehouse associate or junior sales rep. I was way beyond those roles, but without formal education or shiny titles, that's all the world saw me as. Meanwhile, Matt's social media was filled with his hard work pays off posts. He'd post selfies at the office with captions like #grind or #familybusiness, pretending like he was the golden child keeping the company afloat. Every photo was a slap in the face. I tried reaching out to my parents once, hoping maybe they'd realize their mistake. But every conversation turned into them defending Matt or telling me I needed to understand the bigger picture. It became clear they weren't going to admit they screwed me over. So I did the only thing I could. I started over. At first, I took whatever jobs I could find, delivery driving, manual labor, temp gigs. But all the while, I kept thinking about everything I'd learned at the company. The industry knowledge, the supplier contacts, the logistics systems I had personally modernized. I realized something. I knew this business inside and out, better than my parents or Matt ever could. That's when the idea hit me. What if I didn't just move on? What if I built something better? Started small. I reached out to a couple of old contacts, clients I had personally managed, suppliers who respected me. I didn't pitch them right away. Instead, I just checked in, asked how business was going, planted the seed that I was exploring new opportunities. To my surprise, a lot of them admitted they missed working with me. Some even hinted they weren't happy with how my parents were running things lately. That gave me fuel. I picked up a few night classes in business management, accounting, and leadership at a local community college. It was humbling, sitting in classrooms with kids younger than me, but I didn't care. I wasn't just learning for a piece of paper, I was building my arsenal. By year 2, I had enough confidence to take the leap. I partnered with a small but ambitious entrepreneur I'd met through networking events. Together, we started a lean supply company, smaller scale, fewer overhead costs, but more efficient and tech-driven. Everything I had begged my parents to implement, we actually did. The first year was brutal. I worked longer hours than ever, sometimes sleeping in the office, sometimes wondering if I'd made a huge mistake. But slowly, we gained traction. A client here, a supplier there. And then, a big break. One of my parents' former major clients reached out to me. They said the family business had become unreliable and wanted to try my services instead. That was the first time I felt true vindication. By year 4, we weren't just surviving, we were thriving. We weren't the biggest in the industry, but we were innovative, respected, and most importantly, profitable. I had gone from being thrown out like trash to building something entirely my own. And the best part? Word on the street was that my parents' company wasn't doing so hot anymore. Bad leadership, outdated systems, and Matt's incompetence had finally started catching up with them. I'd be lying if I said I didn't smile every time I heard about their struggles. But nothing could have prepared me for the day they came crawling back. It started as whispers. An old colleague mentioned my parents' company had lost a big account. Another hinted at supplier delays and late shipments. At first, I thought it was just gossip, but then I began noticing patterns. Clients I once knew under their banner were suddenly looking for alternatives. And many of them came to me. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same parents who had tossed me aside to cut costs were losing money hand over fist because of the very systems I'd once kept afloat. Without me managing logistics, smoothing over client relationships, and dragging their outdated practices into the 21st century, they were falling apart. Matt, of course, was useless. Rumors swirled that he barely showed up to work, and when he did, he made rash decisions that tanked deals. Suppliers hated him. Clients didn't trust him. Yet somehow he was still sitting in an office chair with his name on the door. For a while I stayed out of it. I told myself, not my circus, not my monkeys. I had my own business to run and it was doing well. But deep down, I'd be lying if I said I didn't enjoy watching their empire slowly crumble. Then, one evening, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. Against my better judgment, I picked up. "Son." It was my dad. His voice was tight, strained in a way I'd never heard before. He danced around the subject for a bit, asking how business was going. But eventually, the truth spilled out. Their company was on the brink. Contracts were drying up, cash flow was a nightmare, and they were weeks away from defaulting on major payments. "We could really use your help," he said finally, his tone dripping with forced humility. "You know this industry better than anyone. If you came back, even as a consultant, I think we could turn things around." I almost laughed out loud. The audacity. Years ago, they told me I was expendable, just another name on the payroll. Now, suddenly, I was the golden ticket? I kept my voice steady. "So you want me to come back and fix the mess Matt made?" Silence on the line. Then a sigh. "It's not about blame, son. It's about family. We need you." Family. That word hit me like a slap. Where was family when they shoved me out the door to protect Matt? Where was family when I was scrambling to pay rent after giving them a decade of my life? I told him I'd think about it just to get off the call. But the truth was I already knew my answer. Over the next few weeks, I got more calls, this time from my mom, even from Matt, who sent me a half-assed text that said, "Bro, we could use you RN. Things are rough." I almost screenshot it to frame on my wall. Meanwhile, something else was brewing. My business partner and I had been approached by a competitor, one of the biggest players in the region. They wanted to expand and saw us as a potential acquisition. At first, I hesitated. Selling my company felt like giving up a piece of myself. But then they mentioned something that made my blood run cold. They were eyeing my parents' company too. Apparently, the collapse had gotten so bad that my family's business was ripe for a takeover. And suddenly, I realized I wasn't just holding the power to help them. I was holding the power to decide whether they sank or survived. For the first time in years, the tables had turned. And I intended to savor every moment. I couldn't sleep the night after that call. I kept tossing and turning, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with a million thoughts. For years, I had dreamed of this exact scenario. The people who betrayed me coming back, broken and desperate, needing me. It should have felt like justice, but instead it felt complicated. On one hand, this was my family, my parents, the people who raised me, who kept a roof over my head, who, at least in their own way, thought they were doing what was best when they pushed me out. If I swooped in now, I could save everything they had built. Maybe, just maybe, I'd finally get the recognition I'd been denied. On the other hand, the wound of betrayal was still fresh, even after all these years. They didn't just fire me, they humiliated me. They chose laziness and favoritism over loyalty and merit. They made me feel disposable. And now, after I rebuilt myself from the ground up, they wanted me to patch up their mess? The competitor's offer made things even messier. They weren't some faceless giant. They were smart, aggressive, and genuinely respected in the industry. If they acquired both my company and my parents, we'd become the dominant player in the region almost overnight. For me, it would mean financial security for life. It would mean power, influence, and a chance to finally stand at the top of the mountain. But it would also mean letting my parents' legacy die. My business partner was blunt. "Look, man, I know this is personal for you, but take the emotion out of it. This is business. If you sell to them, you're set for life. If you try to save your parents, you're taking on a sinking ship. Do you really want to tie yourself back to that?" He wasn't wrong. But it wasn't that simple either. I tried talking to my parents again, this time face to face. When I walked into their office, I barely recognized it. The once bustling warehouse was half empty. The energy was gone. Papers were stacked in messy piles. Phones rang unanswered. It looked less like a thriving company and more like a ghost town. My mom broke down crying the moment she saw me. My dad tried to play it cool, acting like everything was under control, but his eyes gave him away. He looked tired, defeated, older than I had ever seen him. "We just need one big push," he said, gripping my shoulder like he could transfer the weight to me. "With your skills, with your contacts, we can bounce back. This is your family's future." Family. There was that word again. It echoed in my head the entire drive home. I thought about the nights I stayed late at the office, fixing mistakes Matt had made. I thought about the time I missed my best friend's wedding because I was handling a last-minute shipment crisis. I thought about the years of loyalty that ended with them tossing me aside like garbage. And then I thought about the future I could have. A future where I wasn't a second-class son, fighting for scraps of validation. A future where I was in control. The choice should have been obvious. But I wasn't ready to make it yet. Because deep down, there was still a part of me that wanted to hear them say the words they had never said. The words that might make me hesitate. We were wrong. Until I heard that, I couldn't decide. A week passed before I got another call. This time, it was my mom. Her voice was shaky, fragile in a way I'd never heard before. "Can you come over for dinner?" she asked. We need to talk as a family." I almost said no. The idea of sitting across the table from them felt suffocating. But something in her tone made me agree. Maybe it was morbid curiosity. Maybe it was the part of me still waiting for closure. When I walked into their house that Friday evening, I was hit with a wave of nostalgia. The same old family photos lined the hallway. The smell of my mom's cooking filled the air. But the warmth I used to associate with that house was gone. Everything felt tense, brittle, like it could crack at any moment. We sat down, and for a while it was painfully normal. Small talk, half-hearted smiles, Matt scrolling on his phone like he wasn't even there. But eventually, my dad cleared his throat and put his fork down. "Son," he said slowly, "we made a mistake." For a moment I thought I imagined it. The words hung in the air, heavy and surreal. He went on, "When we let you go, it wasn't about you. It was about trying to hold the family together. We thought if we kept Matt, it would push him to step up. We thought we could manage without you. We were wrong." My mom nodded, her eyes wet. "We should have never treated you the way we did. You were the backbone of that business. And we pushed you out when we should have trusted you the most. I'm so sorry." I just sat there, silent. For years, I had replayed this fantasy in my head. My parents finally admitting they screwed up, finally recognizing my worth. Now that it was happening, it didn't feel satisfying. Felt hollow. Because apologies don't erase years of struggle. They don't pay back the rent I almost couldn't cover. They don't erase the humiliation of watching Matt play CEO while I was out hauling boxes to make ends meet. And yet, a part of me wanted to forgive them. To believe that maybe, if I came back, we could rebuild not just the business but the family too. But then Matt spoke up. "Look, bro," he said casually, still not looking up from his phone. "We all know you're the smart one. Just help us out. Okay? You fix things, we keep the company, everyone wins." The entitlement in his voice hit me like a bucket of ice water. Nothing had changed. He still saw me as the fixer, the guy who existed to clean up his messes while he coasted. And in that moment, the fog cleared. Yes, my parents admitted they were wrong. But they weren't asking me to come back out of love, or even out of genuine respect. They were asking because they had no other option. They weren't offering me a partnership or control or even a share of the business. They were offering me servitude dressed up as family duty. And I wasn't about to fall for it again. That night, after dinner, I got a call from the competitor. Their acquisition plans were moving forward fast. They wanted an answer from me within the next 2 weeks. Join forces with them and secure a massive payout or walk away. As I hung up the phone, I realized something. For the first time in my life, my parents' future and the family legacy was entirely in my hands. I wasn't the disposable son anymore. I was the one holding the knife. After that dinner, something in me shifted. Hearing my parents admit they were wrong should have been healing. Instead, it was clarifying. They weren't asking me back because they valued me. They were asking because they were drowning. And they fully expected me to sacrifice myself to pull them to shore. I wasn't going to be their lifeline this time. The very next morning, I called the competitor. We'll call them Titan Supply. They were already circling like sharks, waiting for my parents' business to bleed out completely. When I told them I was ready to talk, their enthusiasm was immediate. We set up a meeting at a sleek downtown office. Walking in, I felt an odd mix of nerves and adrenaline. These were the people who could not only secure my future but also decide the fate of the company that had once cast me aside. The exec across the table leaned in with a smile. "We know you've built something lean, efficient, and profitable. Your company fits perfectly with our model. But what makes this even more interesting," he paused for effect, "is your family connection." They laid it out plain. Titan wanted to buy my parents' business, but it would be messy. My insider knowledge, clients, contracts, internal weaknesses was the golden key. With my cooperation, they could structure a takeover that would be smooth and devastating. In return, they were offering me something I'd never had before, power. Not just a payout. They wanted me to lead their new regional division, overseeing both my own company and whatever was salvaged from my parents' empire. I tried to keep a poker face, but inside, I was buzzing. This was everything I dreamed of, and more. Meanwhile, my parents were spiraling. The calls became daily, then multiple times a day. My mom left tearful voicemails begging me to reconsider. My dad's tone grew sharper, almost demanding, like he thought authority could still sway me. And Matt? He sent me one message that summed him up perfectly. "If you don't come back, we're screwed. Don't be selfish." Selfish. The word almost made me laugh. Where was that energy when they cut me loose to save costs? I decided to play both sides for a bit. On one hand, I kept stringing my parents along, telling them I was thinking about it, watching them dangle promises they'd never considered before. On the other hand, I was feeding Titan the information they needed, supplier weaknesses, upcoming contract renewals, even details about the warehouse lease that would make negotiations brutal for my parents. Every piece of information I gave Titan felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. Years of humiliation, dismissed ideas, and sleepless nights, all being converted into leverage. But it wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about proving something, that I wasn't disposable, that I wasn't just the worker bee they could discard. I was the one pulling the strings now. Still, a small part of me wrestled with guilt. These were my parents. This was the business that put food on our table when I was a kid. Could I really help dismantle it piece by piece? Then I'd think about Matt's smug face, about the way my dad said, "Your position is being eliminated," about my mom hugging me like I was already gone, and the guilt burned away. The clock was ticking. Titan wanted to move fast. My parents were circling the drain. And me? I was standing in the middle, holding the scales. For the first time in my life, I wasn't powerless. I was the deciding factor. The official offer came on a Monday morning. Titan Supply submitted a formal letter of intent to acquire my parents' company. It was professional, polished, and merciless. The numbers weren't generous. They were insulting. But Titan knew exactly what they were doing. My parents had no leverage. Their contracts were crumbling. Their suppliers were fed up. And word in the industry was that they were weeks away from bankruptcy. And I was the silent architect behind it. 2 days later, my dad called me in a panic. His voice was sharper than usual, almost frantic. "We just got an offer from Titan. It's ridiculous. We can't accept this. Do you know anything about it?" I let a long pause hang in the air before answering. "Yeah, I know." The silence on the other end was deafening. For the first time, my dad seemed to realize just how much I was involved. "We need you at the negotiation table," he said finally, his voice quieter now. "They're trying to bleed us dry. If you're working with them, you can stop this." I didn't answer right away. Instead, I thought about the irony. Years ago, I had begged them to listen to me, to take my ideas seriously. They ignored me, dismissed me, and ultimately tossed me out. Now they were begging me to show up because without me, they had no chance. I agreed to attend the meeting, but not for their sake. I wanted to see it play out with my own eyes. The negotiation was held in a sleek conference room downtown. Titan's legal team sat on one side of the table, polished and confident. My parents walked in looking exhausted, carrying messy folders stuffed with papers, as if paperwork could disguise their desperation. Matt trailed behind them, late as usual, wearing a wrinkled shirt like he'd just rolled out of bed. I took a seat in the middle between the two sides, and for a moment the room went still. My parents looked at me like I was a lifeline. Titan's execs looked at me like I was their secret weapon. And me? I felt like the most powerful person in the room. The talks were brutal. Titan outlined every weakness in my parents' company. Late payments, declining revenue, client complaints. My dad tried to push back, but every argument he raised was met with hard evidence that I had quietly supplied. My mom's hands shook as she flipped through documents she clearly hadn't prepared for. Then Matt tried to speak up. "This company is more than just numbers," he said, puffing out his chest. "We've got loyalty, we've got reputation." Titan's lawyer cut him off with a thin smile. "Loyalty doesn't pay invoices, Mr. Last Name. Reputation doesn't cover payroll. The numbers don't lie." The look on Matt's face was priceless, like a kid realizing his safety net was gone. At one point, my mom turned to me directly. "Please," she whispered, her eyes pleading. "You can't let them do this. You know us. You know what this business means to our family." And that's when I realized the full weight of the moment. For years, they had made me feel small, disposable, replaceable. Now, in front of an entire boardroom, they were admitting the opposite. I was the only one who could decide their fate. I leaned back in my chair, steepled my hands, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the discarded son. I felt like the executioner. The meeting ended with Titan holding firm on their offer. My parents walked out looking like ghosts. Titan's team, on the other hand, was practically glowing. And me? I was caught between two emotions, satisfaction and dread, because I knew what was coming next. The final choice. The morning I made the call, I barely slept. My apartment was quiet except for the hum of my computer and the occasional car outside. I sat at my desk staring at my phone, the Titan message glowing like a beacon. My hand hovered over the screen, thumb shaking slightly. For a moment, I almost called my parents first. Almost. But the words I had heard at dinner, the betrayal, the wasted years, the hollow apologies, they all surged back, louder than any plea. I remembered standing in that office, packing my things while Matt scrolled on his phone. I remembered the nights I worked until dawn fixing mistakes no one acknowledged. I remembered my parents' faces as they told me I was let go to save costs. No, I dialed Titan's number instead. The voice on the other end was warm, excited, ready to make history. I said calmly, "Let's move forward." There was a brief pause, and then a smile could almost be heard through the phone. "Welcome aboard. You're going to love this." And just like that, the die was cast. The takeover began immediately. Titan swooped in with ruthless efficiency. Contracts were renegotiated, suppliers reassessed, assets evaluated. My parents' company, which had once seemed invincible to me as a kid, crumbled in record time. Orders were redirected, invoices restructured, and slowly, the empire my family had built for decades fell into Titan's hands. I didn't do it publicly. I didn't rub it in. But I was there, quietly overseeing the integration, ensuring that every weak spot I knew about was accounted for. Every flawed system, every mismanaged account, they were corrected by Titan but under my direction. My parents watched powerless. The first time I saw my dad's face after a week of meetings, I noticed a new hardness in his expression. No pleading, no excuses. Just the hollow acknowledgement that the boy he once underestimated had finally outmaneuvered him. My mom cried softly in the corner of her office when she realized what had happened. Not at me, but at the world that had moved on without her. And Matt sat in the corner, scrolling through his phone, trying to figure out how to blame someone else for losing the company he never earned. I didn't gloat. I didn't revel. I simply watched. And for the first time in years, I felt like I had reclaimed my life. Yet the victory was bitter. I had taken the ultimate revenge, but at a cost. The family I had once loved, the people who raised me, were broken. And the irony wasn't lost on me. Titan's acquisition secured my future, my power, my financial freedom, but it left a wound in my heart that no amount of money or authority could heal. When my parents finally approached me weeks later, they didn't ask for mercy. They didn't beg. They just said, quietly, "You were right. You always were." I nodded, keeping my emotions in check. I had nothing left to say. Words couldn't undo what had been done. I had made my choice, and I was free. Months passed since the takeover. My life changed in ways I had only dreamed of. I was now leading Titan's regional division, overseeing both my own company and the assets acquired from my parents. The office was sleek, efficient, humming with energy. Clients respected me, suppliers trusted me, and my team looked to me for guidance. I had power, authority, and financial security. But every victory carried a shadow. I didn't speak to my parents much anymore. When I did, it was brief, businesslike. The warmth that had once existed between us was gone, replaced by a thin layer of politeness and acknowledgement of the past. They couldn't hide the bitterness entirely. My dad's pride was fractured, and my mom's gentle authority was now tinged with defeat. And Matt? I rarely heard from him, though the occasional passive-aggressive email reminded me he still existed. Sometimes, late at night, I'd think about what I had done. I hadn't destroyed my parents' company entirely. Titan had acquired it, modernized it, made it profitable again, but it wasn't theirs anymore. Every mistake, every weakness I had pointed out, every system I had let crumble under Titan's supervision was a reminder of how far they had fallen without me. I struggled with guilt at first. I had been offered the chance to save them, to be the prodigal son returning to fix the family legacy. And yet I hadn't. I had chosen myself. I had chosen justice, revenge, and my own future. I had chosen not to forgive them, even when they finally admitted they were wrong. I wasn't naive. I knew some people would call me cruel, heartless, even monstrous. But I also knew the truth. My parents had treated me as disposable. They had ignored my years of dedication, choosing favoritism and laziness over loyalty and hard work. The company's collapse was a consequence of their own decisions, not mine. Still, I wrestled with one lingering thought. Had I crossed the line from self-preservation into cruelty? I've tried to answer that question every day since. The truth is complicated. I gave them no help, no lifeline, no opportunity to make amends. I let them face the consequences of their choices. And yet, in doing so, I didn't actively destroy them. I simply stepped aside, letting the business fall into capable hands that valued efficiency and leadership. Reddit. This is why I'm asking. AITA for refusing to save my parents' company after they fired me to cut costs, while keeping my lazy brother? I want people to understand the full context. Years of sacrifice, humiliation, and betrayal, followed by a moment where I had the power to fix it all, or let them face reality. I chose the latter. I'm financially secure, professionally respected, and finally in control of my life. But at what moral cost? AITA?